Welcome. I know we have press watching on the live stream. So I'm Scott Wiener. I have the honor of representing San Francisco and northern San Mateo County in the state Senate. And we're here today. I'm joined by transit leaders from around the state. We're here to call on the legislature and the governor for all of us to work together to address one of the most, I think, underappreciated crises facing California today, specifically the transit fiscal cliff that we're going to start seeing in the next 12 to 24 months if we don't find funding solutions for California's public transportation systems. Our transit agencies are already starting to see shortfalls, and that is only going to cascade. The state needs to step in through our budget to throw a lifeline to our transit agencies. These cuts are not theoretical, and they're not just numbers on paper. This is about real life. If we start, we could see, for example, BART eliminate weekend service or only have hourly trains, which would, of course, have other cascading impacts on AC Transit and other systems. We could see Muni eliminating entire bus lines. We know that in Southern California, LA Metro faces huge and growing operational deficits. This fiscal cliff, these deficits didn't just happen. We just went through what is hopefully a once-in-a-century pandemic. At the depth of the pandemic, ridership had fallen by 95% on many of these systems. Ridership is recovering, but it's not recovering quickly enough. And we know that in the next 12 to 24 months, the federal emergency funds, and without those federal emergency funds, we would see systems go belly up. We would have seen systems go belly up. Those emergency funds run out, and we have a mismatch. Ridership hasn't recovered as quickly as we would need to make up for the loss of those federal funds, and that's why the state needs to step in. When transit systems have fewer riders, it means less revenue, and if that leads to service cuts, that means even more riders leave the systems because they're not reliable enough, and then we see further service cuts. It's something that we call a death spiral. We also know that costs have been rising at exactly the wrong time, and so we need to step in. Just a few hours ago, I'm thrilled to say that our Senate Democratic Caucus, my Senate colleagues, we came together and put forward a framework for the budget responding to the governor's proposed budget from January. The governor's proposed budget proposed to cut transit capital funds by about $2 billion. Our Senate Democratic Caucus budget framework rejects all of the proposed transit capital cuts and commits to finding funding solutions for operational shortfalls, including creating some additional flexibility so that systems can use different kinds of funds to close the operational deficit. I'm so grateful to our Senate leadership, Senator Tony Atkins, the leader of our Senate, to Nancy Skinner, the chair of our Budget Committee, and to all of my colleagues for really getting it when it comes to transit. In addition, yesterday the California Transit Association issued a proposal or indicated that the statewide transit operational shortfall over the next 5 years is approximately $5 billion. That means we need about $1 billion a year for the next 5 years. That is completely doable. We can absolutely do that with a combination of funding and flexibility. So this is a problem that is not out of our grasp. It is very fixable. And yesterday I submitted a letter echoing the California Transit Association's asks and ideas for funding solutions. In addition, I am also supporting creating flexibility for highway funds so that we can use some of the highway funds for transit operations, particularly since California is receiving more federal highway funds than we had anticipated. This matters so much for the future of California. If we allow transit systems to unravel, we are going to see huge economic consequences as workers can't get to work. We are going to see huge impacts on our low-income communities, transit-dependent communities. We are also will completely undermine our own climate goals. So as a result, it is critically important that we unite our legislature and our governor and solve this problem, and we have a clear path to doing so. With that said, I now want to turn it over to Michael Pimentel with the California Transit Association.
Well, thank you, Senator. Good afternoon. I'm Michael Pimentel, the Executive Director of the California Transit Association, a statewide nonprofit organization representing in Sacramento more than 220 member organizations, including 85 transit and rail agencies in the state. As you just heard, California transit agencies are facing pandemic-induced challenges like slow ridership growth, a widening workforce gap, and impending operating deficits that threaten their ability to provide service and to contribute to our state's environmental, mobility, and equity objectives. In fact, a recent report by the UCLA Institute of Transportation Studies highlighted how widespread these challenges are, showing, among other things, that financial shortfalls loom at agencies statewide, beginning for some as soon as the upcoming fiscal year. Now, I'm pleased to stand here today alongside legislative champions, agency leaders, business groups, and advocates to call for the state of California to provide additional funding to save public transportation here in the Golden State, and of course to show thanks and appreciation to Senator Wiener and his colleagues in the Senate for recognizing this need in their budget framework released earlier today. My association stands ready to provide support to the legislature to deliver for California's transit agencies. And to that end, the budget request that we at the California Transit Association unveiled just yesterday outlines a path to securing more than $5 billion in operating funding over the next 5 years. It's an ambitious ask supported by our members from across the state, and it demonstrates our industry's resolve in working together to address the issues that stand before us to support the Californians who rely on us. If approved, our request would apply toward an estimated $6 billion in statewide funding need, allowing for agencies to continue day-to-day operations while they make improvements to their services to meet changing travel patterns. We can't jeopardize our industry's reinvention and investment in the future by letting agencies run out of lifeblood operations funding today. Now more than ever, we are urging state support to ensure we are there for those who depend on public transit and have the resources to meet our shared long-term objectives. If you have any questions as we conclude this press conference, happy to take them.
Thank you, Michael. There was a narrative, I think, early when this crisis was emerging that this is more of a Bay Area issue. It's not. This is statewide. We're joined by three leaders in three of our major California transit agencies, and I'm going to ask them to come up. Michael Turner, the Deputy Executive Director, or Executive Officer at LA Metro, Jeff Tumlin, the Director of Transportation at the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, and Bevan Dufty, who's a member of the Board of Directors.
Thank you, Senator Wiener. My name is Michael Turner with LA Metro, and LA Metro is facing the same fiscal cliff that all transit agencies in California are facing. For us, that we're looking at about $1 billion shortfall in the coming 3 years. That's similar in size and proportion to that's being experienced by our friends in the Bay Area, and it happens around that same time and for the same reasons that everybody is facing it. So this is a statewide problem, and we need to make sure that the solutions we put in place are statewide. We're happy to support the Transit Association's proposals, which were endorsed by a number of my colleagues behind me as a statewide consensus. We want to move that forward in the legislature this year. LA Metro has done a lot to address the challenges we face. We're innovating, we're investing in new services, we've restructured our transit services, we've accelerated our zero-emission bus conversion, and those are things that are unique and We're one of the only agencies in the state that have taken such a comprehensive approach. We also have a number of our board members here today, and I want to especially thank Senator Wiener for reaching out. Senator Wiener has a history of reaching across the Central Valley, across the Tehachapies, to work with Southern California, and so we're proud to stand with him today and join in that ask. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Tumlin, and I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. We run Muni, and Muni carries nearly 400,000 people every day. Our riders are 50% people of color, and over 70% make less than $50,000 per year. Muni riders are dependent upon transit service in order to get to work, to get to school, to get to their medical appointments, to get to the senior center, to do all of the things that most Californians take for granted. If we care about social equity here in California, we must find a way of closing transit's fiscal cliff gap. Also in San Francisco, about half of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation, just like most of the rest of California. Of that, about 75% is private cars and trucks, while less than 1% is public transit. If we care about advancing our fight against climate change, we have to fund public transit through this critical time period. Also, for anyone who cares about economic recovery, there is no economic recovery in California's most intense jobs creation center, which is downtown San Francisco. Downtown San Francisco economic recovery absolutely requires transit to be there in order to deliver people to new jobs that are occupying downtown San Francisco office buildings. We in San Francisco are doing everything that we can to restructure Muni service, to cut costs, to raise local funding, and to collaborate with our partners in the region in order to raise regional funding. But that is not enough. We are desperate for support from the state, and we are so grateful to Senator Wiener and his partners throughout the state legislature in helping to make sure that transit can not only recover, but thrive in the future. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Bevan Dufty, and I'm an elected member of the BART Board representing the eastern neighborhoods of San Francisco. And just this very morning, I rode Muni from the Castro to get to Civic Center, and then I transferred to a BART train and to the East Bay, and then came here. And so I think that the linkages that we have because of mass transit are extremely important. I want to thank Senator Wiener and the California Transit Association for their leadership. We believe that the letters that they released yesterday outline reasonable paths to secure gap funding without major affects to the general fund while we move towards a sustainable funding model in the long term. The Bay Area counts on BART. We run 220,000 trains a year and serve 5 counties that are home to 6 million people. BART's ridership, like Muni, reflects the Bay Area. 67% identify as non-white, 44% don't own a vehicle, and 31% are low income. If BART fails, it would be a devastating blow to the diverse communities across the region. Before the pandemic, fares provided more than 70% of the funding for BART service, more than any transit agency in the world, but what was once a source of pride has become our Achilles heel. Fare revenues have plummeted, and we need this bridge to help us reimagine some of our transit, but most of all to recognize that we can't address greenhouse gas emissions and global warming without a vibrant transit system in California. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Before we get to our last round of speakers, I have to get back to committee in a few minutes, so for any reporters who have questions for me to answer, I can do it now before we get to, and then they'll continue and can answer questions at the end. Yes. Well, we have heard from some transit agencies about the zero emission mandate and timeline, and that is certainly a topic that has been injected into the conversation for sure. But in terms of the long term, I think right now, I don't think any of us can say exactly what commute patterns and transportation patterns are going to look like in 2, 3, 5 years, right? We are coming out of the pandemic. Things have obviously changed, but it's still very much in motion. And I think it's going to take a few more years for us to really know exactly what the structure needs to be. And we need to be looking at different kinds of reforms and what that will look like. But right now, we have an emergency where in the next 12 to 24 months, we're going to start seeing massive, debilitating service cuts by transit agencies that are going to be potentially impossible to reverse once we do understand the changes, the long-term changes in transportation patterns. And wouldn't it be tragic if we realize in a few years that we need to make some changes, but the systems are either no longer around or they are in such a weakened state that they can't even meet those change needs. So this is about triage and stabilizing a very dangerous situation so that over the next few years we can actually have those conversations from a position of financial stability and not from a position of financial chaos. I will also say that I chair the Senate Select Committee on Bay Area Public Transportation. We are going to have an oversight hearing in May, and one of the things we're going to talk about are the reforms that our transit systems in the Bay Area, at least, are already working on. Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to, yeah. So, how much? Apparently I have a little more time. So, sorry for that interlude. I'm now going to call up, we have three community leaders and business leadership organizations that are here. I want to call up Laura Tolkoff from the Survive and Thrive Coalition, Emily Loper, the Vice President of Public Policy at the Bay Area Council, a major Bay Area business coalition, and Georgia Gann Dorman, the Assistant Director for Legislation and Public Affairs at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is our regional transportation oversight agency. And Dylan Favris with the SF Transit Riders.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Laura Tolkoff. I'm with SPUR, and I'm here as part of the Survive and Thrive Coalition, which is a broad pro-equity, civic, business, and environmental coalition that is fighting to save and improve public transit, including some of our colleagues here today, Bay Area Council, Natural Resources Defense Council, Public Advocates, Seamless Bay Area, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, SPUR, Transform, and Urban Habitat. Thank you so much to Senator Wiener for making this a central priority for you, and to the Senate Democratic Committee for sending a clear message that public transit is an essential priority for the state. Other states have stepped in big ways. The current proposal is a great first step, but if we want transit to survive and improve, we must do more in California. We know it's a hard budget year, but let's focus not on what saving and improving public transit is going to cost, but what it's worth. The state has pegged much of its ambitious climate equity, housing, health, and housing goals to having great transit. These are worthy goals, but we will never reach them if the state permits transit to slip into a death spiral of deeper service cuts and disrepair. If we want better transit, we must be willing to invest in it. Now is the time for state leaders to respond with speed and unity to prevent the collapse of public transit before it's too late. Thank you to Senator Wiener for his leadership, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Good afternoon. I'm Emily Loper with Bay Area Council. We represent over 300 major employers across the Bay Area, and we are proud to be a founding member of the Survive and Thrive Coalition to ensure that transit survives this crisis and thrives moving forward. Over 50 years ago, the Bay Area Council was instrumental in the creation of the BART system, which became the backbone of our regional economy. Now today, despite the rise of remote work, Residents of all income levels still depend on BART, Muni, and transit systems across the state to access their jobs. If looming service cuts make it so difficult for people to commute, we risk losing this workforce and the economic engine along with them. Such severe service cuts could also dramatically increase traffic congestion and erode our quality of life. But with this crisis brings an opportunity to rebuild transit into a better, safer, cleaner, and more integrated network that becomes the preferred travel option going forward. That's why we're working on strategies to regrow transit ridership and accountability measures to make sure the funds are spent wisely. But we can't make those improvements if the systems fall apart now. I want to thank Senator Wiener for his leadership on this issue and his Senate colleagues for being willing to work together on a solution. Our future economy truly depends on it. Thanks.
Georgia Dorman here, speaking on behalf of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. Our commission is responsible for charting a path for the Bay Area that delivers on our residents' charge for a more affordable, connected, healthy, diverse, and vibrant community. I want to thank Senator Wiener for all of his efforts to help make that plan a reality, and specifically his work championing transit in the state budget this year. A thriving transit network is foundational to the vision that we all share in the Bay Area and across the state. We envision a future that's sustainable, equitable, and one where we continue to be an economic powerhouse. Without transit, the Bay Area and the state cannot meet our state climate goals, our goals around equity, and our goals around jobs. And that is why we have such a robust cross-section of folks here today to talk about the importance of this issue. So major transit operators in California and throughout the nation are facing dire budget crises, and we need state support to survive and to thrive. I want to commend the Senate for including in their budget plan today a marker that transit is a state priority and a commitment to working to address this major fiscal crisis in this year's budget. We know that Senator Wiener will continue to champion this throughout the budget process, and we stand ready to support him in all those efforts.
Good afternoon. I'm Dylan Fabris from San Francisco Transit Riders. We're a member-supported nonprofit organization advocating for better transit in San Francisco. It's a little bit late today because my train struck a car, which I think is in some way a metaphor for the current transit funding situation here. But I'm here today representing the thousands of riders who rely on public transportation every day in San Francisco and who desperately need this funding from the state to ensure they can get back to business as usual without having to worry about whether or not their bus is coming. I'm here representing senior citizens from the Bayview who tell us that they've had to wait 20 minutes in the rain after missing their bus connection, which now comes less often than it did before the pandemic. I'm here representing the high school teacher from the Sunset who has had to start classes later this year because so many of his students who rely on Muni to get to school have been passed up by buses already full of other commuters. And I'm here representing all the carless transit riders across the Bay who have reached out to us asking when their go-to lines to their favorite park or their best friend's house or their doctor's office will finally be restored. We know that for so many people in San Francisco and across the state, public transit is a lifeline or a connection to the things they love. And while our transit agencies have done their best to restore service to the lines that are most important to riders, they need more operating funding to bring service up to the levels that riders deserve. Right now, we're in the midst of two simultaneous existential crises. On one hand, we're hearing constant news of fiscal cliffs and death spirals which threaten to wreak havoc on our public transportation systems. If we don't find a stable source of funding for our transit agencies, they will have to cut back service to unsustainable levels, leaving hundreds of thousands of transit-dependent Californians stranded, worsening the burden of income inequality and adding to emissions and congestion on our already overcrowded streets. On the other hand, climate change threatens our very existence as a species. We've all been witness to skies red with wildfire smoke and deadly bomb cyclones in recent years. In order to mitigate the existential threat of climate change, it's imperative that we first address the existential threat facing transit agencies. Only by shifting Californians out of their cars and onto buses and trains do we stand a chance at meeting our own climate goals. In San Francisco, we have seen ridership meet or exceed pre-pandemic numbers on lines that have recently received capital or frequency improvements, proving that with smart planning and enough funding, we can encourage more people to ride the bus and take the train. San Francisco Transit Riders is proud to join Senator Wiener and the other organizations and advocates here today in calling for more operational funding in next year's budget. I believe in California. I believe we can lead the nation to a greener and more equitable future where people love their transit agencies and bus drivers as much as they currently love their cars. But in order to get there, we first have to fund transit. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, thank you, everyone. Those are all our speakers, and we're happy to answer any press questions if you have for the other folks.
At Muni, our fiscal cliff hits in 2025, and our deficit then is approximately $130 million, rising to about $215 million per year the following year. That's the equivalent of 20 bus lines, each of which currently carries between 1,000 and 20,000 riders per day. If I need to cut 20 Muni lines in 2025, I need to start this summer, eliminating one line per month until our budget balances, unless there's some assurance from the state and regional and local governments that I can close my deficit, because the alternative is laying off my workforce who helped San Francisco get through the worst days of the pandemic by showing up every single day to deliver essential workers to work when we had no idea what the pandemic was going to bring to us.
For BART, our runway will end in 2025, as similar to what Muni described. During the pandemic, we did a lot to save funds and to husband or preserve the resources that the federal government was providing us. But during this time, we had a hiring freeze, we moved operating staff to Capitol, and we really can't cut our way out of this. We don't think that Bay Area residents are going to want to see a BART that has one train per hour. And so we're in a very similar situation. And again, we were an agency that was so proud of the fact that 70% of our operating costs were borne by our fare revenue, and that was something was a point of pride. But as we've experienced in the past 3 years, it really is our Achilles heel. Yes. So one of the things that's interesting about the post-pandemic era is that before, our ridership on evening and weekends had softened, and it was reducing, and we've actually seen on our Sunday ridership is 50% of pre-pandemic and high 40s for Saturday, and more riders on evenings. So for us, we're looking at where our potential riders are, and so we are adding service to try and even boost those numbers higher. And so we are proud of that. I can also say that we are starting in our new fiscal year on July 1st. We're expanding the pilot that MTC did with us and other agencies to have low-income rider fares, which BART had never had before. And so we're going to be expanding that from a 20% benefit for our riders that are 200% of poverty or below. We're expanding that to 50%. And so we're going to have a very ambitious program in communities, ethnic communities in and around the Bay Area to get people signed up for this program. But I think it's a bold step that our General Manager, Bob Powers, has taken, is to recognize that if you look at the ridership in stations in communities of color, that we're not at the top. It was always the 4 downtown stations, some of which I represent. But now we are seeing that stations like Coliseum, stations like Fruitvale, those stations are really chock-a-block in the mornings. And I should have added to what the transit riders pointed out. My trains were quite crowded this morning. Very happy to see.
In LA, it's a similar time frame. It's just significantly larger because we're looking at a budget deficit of about $400 million in 25, growing to another $500 million the year after that. So it gets to about $1 billion. And like I mentioned, there are a number of things we've done to invest in transit recovery, such as homeless services we're investing in. We're innovating with microtransit. We've actually accelerated our zero-emission bus program, and the board's going to have to start looking at all of those things beginning next year. So we're all in the same boat. It's everybody in the state, San Diego, Orange County, Los Angeles, the Bay Area. We're all in similar circumstances, and the solution has to be statewide to recognize that.
Anything else? Okay. Okay, thank you, everyone. And for folks who are on the live stream, feel free to reach out to our office for any follow-up. So thank you.